This is Hector with Faith and Fandom, reading a audio chapter of Stan Lee Leaving a Legacy from Faith and Fandom Book 6. This is going to be a one-shot read-through, so if I make a mistake, I'm going to keep going. So, here we go. I've known the name of Stan Lee for as long as I can remember. From being a kid hanging out in my local comic book shop to seeing his name on comics, cartoons, and in every aspect of nerd culture in general. He's been present in my life. Quite frankly, he was everywhere in my nerdy bubble. I grew up in the 80s, and it was still not cool to be a geek or a nerd. You could still get picked on for watching cartoons or reading comic books. So much of that has changed, and I honestly believe Stan Lee is a major reason why. Stan had been the constant face and association with comic books for generations. This is a guy who went from a job filling the inkwells of comic artists to becoming a household name and entertainment mogul. He started his work in that industry in 1939 and was active in it until the time of his death. People knew him for a variety of different reasons. My oldest daughter, Rosa, knew him as his character on Marvel's Superhero Squad. My middle daughter, Bella, knew him as the guy who was in all the Marvel movies. My high school best friend knew him as the guy from Mallrats. My muggle friends knew him as the guy from the picture on my wall. They were familiar with him, but didn't realize how deep and vast his contribution to pop culture was. He not only created and nurtured some of the greatest comic book characters of all time, but he was the figurehead of nerd culture becoming cool. He was there at the beginning and saw it at its pinnacle. He became part of our families. While he wasn't a perfect person, he also wasn't a wildly controversial person. He managed to work in a public industry for more than 60 years and still exited with a good reputation. He was beloved. You know how hard that is to accomplish? I've watched actors, musicians, and ministers I admired crumble and fall away because their integrity and reputation were shattered. Some poor decisions, or a series of poor decisions, leave their names tarnished beyond belief. Pausing for 1 second, because someone sent me a text. There we go. Actors removed from prominent TV shows over their past actions. Voice actors severed from their community over allegations. And so many other terrible things can happen to a person that could ruin their name. In the geek world, Stan Lee went out as the gold standard of names. Even in the Bible, it's hard to find a leader without a tarnished name. David was an adulterer, Moses was a murderer, Jonah a selfish crybaby, Peter a betrayer, etc. Even in the face of all they accomplished, their names are tarnished by their shortcomings. God was still able to use these people, but our goal should be our stories ending with our good name. Proverbs 22 verse 1 says, "A good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold." At the time of his passing, Stan Lee's net worth was somewhere between $50 to $80 million. Even in all of that money, I can tell you this: his reputation and legacy will long outlast every one of those dollars. My friend Crispy and I talked about Stan's passing on our Pull List podcast. One of the things that came up is the idea of who would be the next Stan Lee and seriously carry that torch. Growing up for me, Joe Montana was considered the greatest quarterback of all time. Now, Tom Brady has taken that mantle as the next greatest. Michael Jordan was the greatest of his generation, and while many still consider Mike the greatest period, LeBron James is easily the next greatest of his time. Sorry for using sports analogies in a nerd book. For us sitting here today, it's hard to imagine who the next Stan Lee could be. Maybe Jim Lee, or Jeff Loeb, or Kevin Smith. I don't know who it will be, or when, but one day someone will get that label. Somewhere in print, someone will be addressed as the new Stan Lee. When that happens, it will be meant as a blessing and a compliment. It will be a weighty mantle of responsibility and privilege. Proverbs 10 verse 7 says, "The name of the righteous is used in blessings, but the name of the wicked will rot." You ever actually heard someone's name be used as a curse? Judas, Benedict Arnold, Hitler, Nickelback. There are just some names you associate with being negative or toxic. How is your name spoken right now? Is it encouraging or infamous? Most of us don't necessarily care how people use our name, but bottom line, our names are attached to God's name. If our name is negative, it speaks negatively of God. That's not where we want to be. I remember getting the news of Stan's death. I was sitting in a staff meeting at church, and my wife texted me to tell me. Her high school BFF had texted her to make sure she knew so that she could tell me. Literally, someone hours away contacted my wife immediately so that she could be the one to deliver the news. I sat there in my meeting, and it was somber. I couldn't exactly interrupt a meeting of ministry professionals because I was emotional Stan Lee had died. Eventually, though, when I finally spoke up about it, people were sad. But then I started oddly getting the phrase, "I'm sorry for your loss." People were calling me, texting me, etc. They were asking if I was okay. I legit think more people called me when Stan Lee died than when my mother or father died. It's not that I was close to him. It's just that they knew I cared. It also helps that I'm the poster boy for geek world to most of my Muggle friends. So I'm the one person they think to check in on. We all knew this was coming eventually, though. I had been around Stan Lee for 3 different occasions, and in the early years of Faith and Fandom, I just couldn't afford the cost of meeting celebrities. Eventually, it hit me. I'm desperately running out of opportunities to meet him. So finally, I went to meet him. He was sitting there in a chair, and a handler gave a warning about not squeezing him too hard. My heart melted. He was my sweet old comics grandpa. I walked up to him, and he looked at me and said, "You're doing a great job." I have no idea why those were his words. I wish I could say that low-key Stan Lee knew who I was. I'd love to believe the fantasy that he checked my books out while perusing Artist Alley after hours. I don't believe any of that. I believe he just knew it would be something nice for me to hear. And he was right. I heard Stan Lee tell me I was doing a great job face to face. I will take that to my grave as a happy memory. I saw him several times after that, but we knew it was coming. Once his wife passed away, we knew for sure it was coming soon. I've rarely seen elderly couples that loved each other survive for very long after their partner had passed. I wasn't surprised when it wasn't long after she passed that he passed as well. Sitting there at my church office, hearing the news, and all the days that followed, people showed they cared. It wasn't because they knew Stan, but because they knew he was important to me. And millions of other people as well. The day he died was sad, but it was also a beautiful day, watching everyone unite and share their memories and thoughts. Ecclesiastes 7 verse 1, "A good name is better than fine perfume, and the day of death better than the day of birth." Whenever I see scriptures mentioning the day of death being good or death being a positive thing in general, I always have this natural pushback on it. I was thinking on this scripture and preparing for this, and it really hit me how true it is. The day of your birth, you literally have nothing. You have potential and hope, but beyond that, you have nothing to show for your life. The day you die, you will have completed your story on this earth. All your victories and defeats will have happened. Your successes and failures will have been noted, and you will have impacted an entire lifetime of people and live on in the memories, actions, and legacies of all the people you've impacted. In that way, the day Stan Lee died was a better day. Very few people celebrated when Stanley Martin Lieber entered the world in 1922. But the whole world noted, celebrated, and will now remember when Stanley exited the world in 2018. If we live our lives so ineffectively that there is no more impact on the world the day we die than on the day we were born, we've effectively wasted all the days and years God has given to us. As Stan Lee said, 100 years from now, if somebody should bring up my name, if it would still be around, it would be nice if people would say, "Geez, I thought he was a good writer. His stories gave me a lot of pleasure." That's what people tell me now, and it's the best thing any writer can ever hear. I know Stan created and nurtured so much. His writing literally has shaped generations of entertainment, and I think he will get his request that people will celebrate his stories. People quote his cameos as much as his comics. But I think the line that will forever go down as his biggest quote was the epic defining moment in the Spider-Man mythos. With great power comes great responsibility. I think we all felt that in our souls when we heard it. While it is basically a paraphrase of Jesus and Luke, the way Stan set up the story and its delivery are iconic beyond belief. In Luke 12, verse 48, it says, "But someone who does not know and then does something wrong, he will be punished only lightly. But when someone has been given much, much will be required in return. And when someone who has been entrusted with much, even more will be required." Jesus tells us that we are responsible to use what we have been given fully and effectively. What we have wasn't given lightly, and we will be held accountable for it. That is the great power and great responsibility of being people who live by faith. Being the people who love God and follow Jesus must represent him well. We have been given much because he has entrusted us with much. When you remember Stanley, I hope you can be challenged to think of what your legacy will look like. I hope you can be challenged to live your life with purpose. Will you live your life in a way that your name is good when your story is told? Will you live your life in such a way that your name is a blessing? Will the day of your death be a day of celebration? What will you do with what you've been given? If you look up definitions of Stan's catchphrase word of Excelsior, the general concept is that it indicates superior quality. Stan Lee himself told the world in 2010, what does Excelsior mean? Upward and onward to greater glory. Here is to living lives worthy of Excelsior.